Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carolyn Cooper, president of ARCS Foundation's Atlanta chapter, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to a ARCS Career Seminar, Career Opportunities for PhD Trainees in Laboratory Medicine. And we are delighted that we have ARC scholars from 21 of our outstanding university partners in attendance today. Within the next hour, it's our goal to inspire you to explore how you can leverage your degree to build a rewarding and impactful career in laboratory science. To begin with, we want to acknowledge our partnership with Roche Diagnostics and to thank them for sponsoring today's program in collaboration with ARCS Foundation. Roche Diagnostics is deeply committed to tackling critical workforce shortages in healthcare by fostering educational initiatives just like this one. They're also participating in a first-of-its-kind pilot program in the Atlanta market, sponsoring 3 ARC scholars studying in fields that can potentially lead to careers in laboratory medicine. This partnership reflects a shared vision of empowering future scientific leaders and addressing the shortage of PhD-level professionals in clinical laboratories. For our guests who may not be familiar with ARCS Foundation, we are a national nonprofit dedicated to advancing U.S. science and technology by supporting academically outstanding students in top-rated STEM programs. ARCS scholars represent the best of the best and are studying in 50 top-ranked research universities across the country. In 2024, ARCS awarded over $5.5 million in unrestricted funds to nearly 700 scholars nationwide, helping support them in their groundbreaking work in fields that drive innovation and scientific competitiveness. If you'd like to learn more about us at ARCS, please go to our website at arcsfoundation.org. Just to let you know, this seminar is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube for your follow-up review. In addition, a link to the seminar recording will be shared with members of the Association of Diagnostics and Laboratory Medicine. A quick note about our logistics today. Our seminar presentation will last approximately 35 to 40 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. So please enter your questions through the Q&A function throughout the presentation. Dr. Noguez will address as many as possible based on our time limits. And if we don't cover all of your questions, Dr. Noguez has graciously offered to respond to them via email after the seminar. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Jamie H. Noguez. Dr. Noguez is an associate professor of pathology at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine and serves as section head of clinical chemistry, toxicology, and diagnostic immunology at University Hospitals Cleveland Medical Center. In her role as medical director of clinical chemistry and toxicology at Cleveland Medical Center, Dr. Noguez has spearheaded the validation and implementation of numerous high-complexity laboratory tests. She's a leading voice for patient safety, test utilization, and health equity, with research that advances diagnostic assay innovation and laboratory diagnostics. Her work is pivotal in enhancing laboratory medicine by developing safe and innovative diagnostic tools to support faster, more accurate diagnoses for patients. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jamie Noguez to share her insights on the dynamic and evolving field of laboratory medicine.
So much, Carolyn. Just give me one moment to share my screen. All right. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. I always look forward to an opportunity to speak with PhD trainees about possible career opportunities in lab medicine. I remember being in your position and wishing that I would have been able to hear career talks like this to help me understand what career options were available for me. So thank you all for your time today. So before we get started, I'd like to give you just a quick overview of what I plan to cover in the talk today. So I'll start with a brief introduction of what lab medicine is. And so if you were like me, when I was in my PhD training program, I had no idea what lab medicine was. I also didn't know what clinical laboratory professionals do. And so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. Then I'll go into the training and career trends that we're seeing in lab medicine to give you an idea of kind of how much training is needed to hold different roles within a clinical laboratory. And then I'm going to close out by talking specifically about careers in clinical chemistry. So I am a board certified clinical chemist, and so this is an area that I am experienced in and have a lot of knowledge in. But I want for you to try to draw parallels between kind of my path into clinical chemistry, knowing that there are similar ones into clinical microbiology or genetics, et cetera, or informatics. And so hopefully my journey will help inspire you to see that it was not always in my career plan to just know that I was going to be a clinical lab professional. It just evolved kind of along the way as I learned about career options. All right, so uh, first we'll start just very basic, right, and talk about what pathology is. So the word pathology refers to the study of disease, and it's a discipline within the field of medicine, and it addresses the four components of disease. So what's the cause of the disease? What is its mechanism of development? What are the structural alterations that we see at the cellular level? What are the consequences of those changes and how they manifest clinically? In pathology, then, this field allows us to provide diagnostic information to both patients and clinicians. And as you can probably tell or surmise, it impacts nearly all aspects of patient care. So whether we're talking about from diagnosing cancers to managing chronic diseases like diabetes, and we do that through providing accurate lab testing. So in pathology, there are two main divisions. So there's anatomic pathology as shown here on the left, and this is just very generally thought of as the study of body parts. And then on the right, we have the other arm, which is clinical pathology, which is the study of body fluid. And a lot of times this is also referred to as laboratory medicine. Now, anatomic pathology is typically concerned with the study and diagnosis of illness through microscopic analysis of tissues. And so they're looking for factors, they're examining things like cell appearance, anatomical makeup of the cells, and chemical signatures within cells. CP, on the other hand, it involves the analysis of blood, urine, CSF, and several other different types of body fluids to help examine and diagnose disease. And so we can do this by identifying changes in a number of different substances that are found in blood and in bodily fluids that can indicate and provide clues to disease or disease risk. So, for example, we can take cholesterol measurements in order to determine someone's heart risk disease, or sorry, risk for heart disease. Then we can also look or measure things that aren't supposed to be in blood or urine or any other body fluid. So these are foreign substances like poisons or tumor markers or recreational drugs, for example. So really then, lab medicine is the application of a variety of scientific disciplines to be able to study human disease. And so this includes biochemistry, molecular biology, and hematology, to name some of the areas. And it allows us to diagnose individuals with particular health conditions or diseases, to provide a prognosis, and to also monitor the progression of the disease. So just to talk a little bit more about like what is lab medicine? Have you ever interfaced with it? Well, most of you have. If you've ever seen a doctor, whether you're not feeling well, or even if you just went for a general checkup, and if the physician ordered lab tests, they would be, samples would be collected, tests ordered, and they would be sent to a laboratory. And that laboratory would process and then analyze those samples. They would generate results that would be reported to the physician, who would then take those lab results and interpret them in conjunction with your clinical signs and symptoms to come up with either a diagnosis or a treatment plan for you. But a lot of people mistakenly think that the lab is just this black box, right? Samples go in, results come out. But in reality, it's an entire field of medicine with trained professionals that are behind that curtain, helping our frontline health workers to treat our patients. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. And then despite being so much behind the scenes, there's data that shows that the majority of medical decision making is actually based on lab test results. So there's a huge impact in the field, though we are kind of behind the scenes. So you may be wondering who works in a clinical laboratory, and there are a number of different people who work in the lab that have varying levels of education in this space. And so many individuals will begin working in a clinical laboratory starting as either a phlebotomist or a processor. And in these roles, they will have a high school diploma and they will have completed a training course that lasts several weeks. And this will teach them how to collect specimens, how to go about doing the processing to get them ready to be tested. There's another group of individuals that work in clinical labs that have, in addition to a high school diploma, they have a 2-year or an associate's degree at the college level in clinical laboratory science. And so these individuals, they're trained on how to collect the samples, how to process them, but they also gain additional information on how to perform some of the basic testing. And so basic testing doesn't mean it's easy testing. It just means that it's some of the testing that may require just loading samples onto an instrument and then releasing these results out if they meet the quality standards into reports for physicians to use for care. Um, there's another level, if you have 2 more years of training on top of that, right? So a total of a 4-year degree after high school. These individuals are clinical laboratory scientists. And so they are able to do sample collection and processing, but they're also trained to do advanced testing. And so what I mean by that is either the test methods are a little bit more technically challenging or rigorous to do, or there's an interpretive component that requires having a bit more education in this space in order to be able to interpret the test appropriately. And then finally, we have medical directors. And so these are individuals that have doctoral degrees. And at this point in your career in lab medicine, you are not actually on the bench doing this testing, but rather performing or offering technical and clinical expertise, right? So you're offering oversight over the sections that perform this testing. And you're ensuring that the testing is of the highest quality and that it's meeting all of the regulatory standards to maintain compliance. So given the nature of this webinar today and who we have joining us, most of you then are looking for a position as a medical director in a clinical laboratory, or would be qualified to be a medical director in a clinical laboratory. So within clinical pathology, there are a number of subspecialties. So all the different areas that I just mentioned of the different training levels, these individuals work in these subsections. Some in specific sections, some across several sections, but this just generally shows the variety of subspecialties that there are. So you know about clinical chemistry based on the introduction about myself, but there's also clinical microbiology, immunology, molecular genetics, cytogenetics, hematology and coagulation, transfusion medicine, and hematopathology. So a wide array of different specialties. What's important for you to know is that in order to be a medical director, you either have to have a PhD or an MD to oversee the subspecialties here that are in the darker purple color. So you can have a PhD or MD and serve as a medical director here. But for the two specialties on the right, transfusion medicine and hematopathology, these are reserved only for MDs because they still have a component where they're actually treating patients, where they're actually doing transfusions, et cetera. But still, there are just many different sections that you can choose to specialize in. So most biological, chemistry, and molecular doctoral degrees will qualify you to be able to pursue a postdoctoral fellowship in laboratory medicine. And so these training programs, they tend to be 2 to 3 years long. And this is where you get that real world experience and the technical, clinical, and the research aspects of lab medicine. So most people who come into this don't really have a solid understanding of like the clinical portion. A lot of them are coming from basic research, and this is where you're learning those clinical aspects. Then after you have completed a fellowship, you have met the requirements to sit for board certification. And this is what's required in order to be a director of a clinical laboratory. Now, I've listed some of the common board exams that are out there, but this is not an extensive or comprehensive list. This is a good number of them. You'll notice that the top two are clinical chemistry boards. I am a diplomate of the American Board of Clinical Chemistry. But there are several other boards where you can gain diplomat status by passing them. So medical microbiology, immunology, genetics, bioanalysis, toxicology, several other areas that aren't even listed on here. So then after you finish your fellowship training, you pass your board exam and you step into your role as the medical director of a clinical laboratory, you really are serving as this link between the frontline clinical staff and the basic sciences. And in this position, you're essentially employing the analytical and interpretive skills that you learned in your PhD and that you further honed in that fellowship. And you're using them to help aid clinicians in the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of disease. And so in this role, some of the things that you'll be doing would be helping to develop or validate new laboratory tests, or procedures, or bringing in new instruments, and working on these things to bring in newest technologies that enable our physicians to make earlier, more precise diagnosis, and also to help them tailor their therapy to their patients. So we're moving into an era of more personalized medicine using more data to get us there. You may also find that you're pulled into developing test guidelines for patient management. So it's not just about bringing the testing in-house and making sure they're accurate and safe. You may also provide guidance on how the test should be used, right? What are the best practices for using this particular test in patient management? So the role of a clinical laboratory professional, it really depends on where they work. So there are three common areas where lab professionals are employed. There are clinical laboratories, such as those found in hospitals, and even those come in a few different flavors, if you will. So there are academic medical centers, there are community hospitals, there are reference laboratories where hospitals will send some of their testing to. There's industry, which is a different sector. And even within industry, there's in vitro diagnostics, there's pharma, there's biotech. And then also there are federal and regulatory agencies. And so these look like a bunch of acronyms here. I'm sure some of you are probably most familiar with CMS, NIH, CDC, or FDA. There are roles for clinical laboratory professionals in these organizations. So in the next few slides, what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on what a role might look like in each of these sectors. So many clinical lab professionals, we are trained in academic medical centers, or those with PhDs, I should say. We're trained in academic medical centers. So a lot of us tend to remain employed by university hospitals and academic medical centers. And our day-to-day jobs involve oversight of the technical operations of that hospital lab. We're providing consultation to our physicians. We are evaluating new tests, bringing new tests and technologies into the laboratory section that we oversee. There are also a number of research opportunities available for those who are academically oriented. And as you can see here in clinical, translational, and basic research, so many different types of research are available to you depending on your level of interest. And then there's always an educational component. So we are teaching either individuals who are working out in the laboratory, medical students, pathology residents, undergraduates, and oftentimes we're giving lectures to students, residents, fellows outside of the laboratory as well on aspects of lab medicine. So the in vitro diagnostic industry, it's a multi-billion-dollar global market. There are so many opportunities out there, both within really large and well-established companies, as well as smaller companies and startups. And so in industry, clinical lab professionals, they may be involved in things like developing new tests and instruments, finding ways to improve the products that we have out there that just need to perform better. They can be involved in customer education or helping to facilitate clinical trials. There are also opportunities out there within pharmaceutical companies to help develop and test biomarkers to monitor drug efficacy and side effects and things like that. So this is clearly not all of the options that are out there, but I want to share with you what working in industry could look like. So there are also a number of opportunities in federal and regulatory agencies. And so regulatory agencies such as College of American Pathologists, they're involved in the oversight of lab accreditation and making sure that they're establishing and enforcing regulations. And these things are necessary to ensure that clinical labs are meeting the federal and state quality standards. They're keeping us in line, making sure everyone's operating above board. There are also federal agencies like the CDC, which you would be familiar with, and these serve as national reference labs for proficiency testing and for performing analysis of extremely dangerous materials. So a lot of times things like when Ebola first hit the US or monkeypox, like we would be sending them to some of these federal reference labs. All right. Well, hopefully by this point in the talk, I've piqued your interest in what a career might look like in lab medicine. I'm going to shift a little bit to talking about or to focus on a career in clinical chemistry, since this is the area that I know so much about. But again, I'll remind you that in this path that I'm about to share with you, there are parallels in microbiology, genetics, informatics, so many different areas. And so just please keep an open mind, and I'm happy to answer more questions at the end of the session or in the QA portion. All right, so as I shared with you in the org chart earlier, clinical chemistry is a subspecialty of pathology that's involved in the analysis of body fluids. And we do this using a number of different analytical techniques to help us diagnose disease in patients, to assess prognosis, and to help physicians monitor the progression or the treatment of that disease. And in chemistry, what I love is that it uses a wide range of analytic techniques. And so this is not all of them that are used, but I wanted to highlight some that you may be familiar with from your PhD studies. And so some of what we do is we measure enzyme activities. We use spectrophotometry to measure concentrations of certain analytes and samples, electrochemistry, immunoassays. So these are antigen antibody-based tests to help us quantitate how much of a particular compound is present in a sample. Chromatography, mass spectrometry. So many different technologies that you use in your PhD research is also used in the clinical laboratory. Now, one of my favorite things about clinical chemistry is that it's such a broad area. There are so many sub-disciplines within clinical chemistry. So when you're board certified as a clinical chemist, there's still so many different sub-disciplines that you can choose to focus on. So focus on immunology. You can do point of care testing, which is testing that's performed at the patient's bedside. Immunology, toxicology, proteomics. You can focus on specific patient populations like pediatrics and maternal fetal medicine. Or you can choose to focus on particular disease states, right? So cardiovascular disease. And so I love the variety and the opportunity that you have to kind of also reinvent yourself as you become further along in your career. So for myself, I'm trained as a generalist, and so I'm not just toxicology only. I oversee clinical chemistry, which includes many different disease states, many different patient populations, and a bunch of different types of tests. And so that's what I like to do, though others have really chosen to focus in particular areas. So know that you have a lot more of a choice when you choose to get board certified in clinical chemistry about where you focus. So when it comes to training in clinical chemistry, so the most straightforward path if you're interested in becoming a clinical chemist is to enter an accredited training program. And so the Commission on Accreditation in Clinical Chemistry, it recognizes currently 37 postdoctoral fellowship programs in clinical chemistry in the US. And so these programs, they end up putting out about 30 fellows completing their training each year. So it's not a large number of fellows. And so I feel like they're appropriately competitive to get into, but also you don't have so many people getting out of these fellowships that they don't find jobs. So there are always plenty of jobs available because of this pipeline that we currently have. So if you're interested in learning more about the specifics of these programs, I encourage you to go to this link, the COMAC website. And so it has all the information for the 37 postdoctoral programs. You click on them and it tells you what their application requirements are, who their faculty are, kind of how it's structured. And so it's just so nice to have a one-stop shop to learn about all of the programs that are available throughout the country. All right, so now let's talk about where most clinical chemists are working. So based on survey data, what we see is that most board certified clinical chemists tend to work in clinical laboratories. And so as you can see on the pie chart on the left here, most work in academic medical centers. So like a little over 50% are working in academic medical centers, followed by those working in community hospital labs or in commercial reference labs. So you could see about 75% are working in clinical laboratories, but there are portions of clinical chemists that do work in industry as well as in the government sectors. There was a survey conducted in 2021, and it indicated at that time that starting PhDs had pretty competitive salaries, right? So across all employment sectors, all geographic regions, PhDs with clinical board certification in clinical chemistry that had less than 3 years of experience, their median total compensation was around 140,000 to 149,000 a year. And then if you take out experience and you look at all levels or all years of experience, clinical chemists in 2021 were making median total compensation range of 180,000 to 189,000 a year. Now, this information proved to be so helpful that ADLM decided to continue to do these surveys on a more regular cadence. And so I could not give this presentation with providing a little bit of updated information. So a survey was performed in 2024 where we can see that these numbers have increased and cover what we've seen in inflation over the years. And so now the median total compensation range for PhD board certified clinical chemists with less than 3 years of experience has gone up by about $40,000 and is now 180 to 189,000. And the total compensation range across all levels of experience, and these are all regions, geographic regions, right? So even the most expensive states and cities, it's 220,000 to 229,000. So this shows that the salary is increasing with the inflation that we're seeing, and also as PhDs become a bit more anchored in the healthcare ecosystem. All right. So now I'm going to focus on my journey into clinical chemistry. And so I feel it's important to share this with you guys so that you know that it wasn't always part of my plan when I started my PhD or my graduate program that I just knew I was going to be a clinical chemist. That wasn't the case. But a lot of what I was doing actually was already working in that, that direction. I just didn't know it. And I actually didn't find out until my very last years of my PhD program that there were careers in clinical chemistry. So I'll give you some specifics of my journey. And I understand fully that I'm dating myself by putting the years on this. um, so I earned my doctorate degree from the University of South Florida, which is in Tampa, Florida. My graduate research was focused on natural product drug discovery and lead optimization. And it really involved a lot of analytical chemistry. So it was isolation, structure elucidation, quantitation, and biological evaluation of a number of different compounds. Some of them were novel, some of them had already been discovered before, but I got a really broad skill set from this. And I had an extensive amount of experience using nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, mass spec, so a lot of analytical techniques. And then I also got some experience in my latter years of my training in laboratory automation for high throughput screening, so of biological assays. So I then pursued a postdoctoral fellowship in chemical biology. So it was in a chemical biology lab at the University of Florida. And I did this to enhance my experience in analytical chemistry, as well as to enhance my or to become more proficient in biological assay development. So like I said, it was later in my PhD training that I started doing this biological assay development and testing, and I wanted to learn more about it, and I wanted to get a stronger skill set. And so this was a good fit for me for this postdoc. And so this research involved investigating how model organisms, so these soil nematodes here, how they use small molecules to communicate information with each other that influences their development, metabolism, behavior, and aging. And so these organisms, they serve as model organisms, and they share a lot of essential biological properties with humans. And so the thought is that any insights that we're gaining from them can be used to help develop cures for human diseases, to improve our understanding of diseases and life, essentially. So then after I completed that fellowship, I pursued a clinical chemistry fellowship at Emory University School of Medicine. And so this was under their pathology department. And so this was a structured 2-year program. And I absolutely love this experience. So each program is a little bit different. So you'd have to do your homework on it. But I love this program because we rotated through so many different types of laboratories. So all those different sectors that I shared with you, I got a chance in my training to rotate through them to be able to envision what a career in each of those would look like for me. So I rotated through laboratories in the Emory healthcare system in Atlanta. It included their core laboratory, their HLA lab, where you're testing compatibility for organ transplants, microbiology, molecular laboratories. And I even got to rotate through like specialty laboratories like IVF and fertility labs. And so that was a very cool experience. I was also able to rotate through Grady Hospital, which is the public hospital in Atlanta, as well as Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, so CHOA, which is a pediatric hospital. And these were both great because they gave me exposure to different patient populations that I wouldn't have seen if I only stayed at the Emory main campus. And it helped me to understand the unique needs and challenges of those particular patient populations and what it would be like treating those different patient populations. It was also very cool that I got to rotate through the CDC, which is a government lab, and that exposed me to more epidemiological research. So that's something that was very different than what I was being exposed to in the hospital clinical labs. And then I was able to rotate through Quest Diagnostics, which is a reference lab. So it performs clinical testing, but it's not attached to a hospital. Hospitals send their samples there. And that exposed me to what it's like to do high volume testing because you're getting samples from all over the country. And also because they're getting samples from all over the country, they're also able to do some of these more esoteric tests that are technically challenging and maybe have very low volumes. And then it's important, I think, to note that I trained alongside the pathology residents. And so in many ways, I was treated just like them. I had to complete the same didactics. I had to participate in journal clubs and departmental conferences. And so I felt very integrated into their training program with their pathology residents. I also had to take call or deal with any issues that arose in the core lab or in send out testing. And so I was hands-on learning what it was like to work in a clinical laboratory. And then I had about 2 to 3 months dedicated to a variety of different research projects. And so there was a small research component there. It's thought that, as PhDs coming in, we're already pretty strong in research and the scientific method. And so most of my time is spent focusing on the clinical part, how to understand how to translate my skills into the clinical side. So in the next 2 slides, I want to just highlight to you kind of what my projects look like so that I can show you how my skills that I learned in my PhD translated into clinical chemistry. It wasn't like I stepped into a whole new world. So many of my skills were transferable, right? They translated well. All right, so one of the projects that I worked on was on assay development. So I told you that in my PhD training that I spent a lot of time honing my analytical skills. So did a lot of chromatography, mass spectrometry, NMR, those types of things. And so this seemed kind of like not as challenging for me to do. It seemed like, hey, I've been separating small molecules before. I know chromatography is just applying that skill to something else. So I was tasked with creating a new LC-MS method to detect some new compounds. So for those who may not be familiar, anticoagulants have been used for many, many years to treat deadly blood clots. And so right around the time when I started my fellowship, there were 3 new anticoagulant drugs that had just been FDA approved, and they were game changers. So previously, the anticoagulants that were available, they had to be measured regularly to make sure that someone was, a patient was still taking the appropriate dose. These new ones were so different because it was a one size fits all approach. One dose given to most individuals. It did what it needed to do to anticoagulate. They did not need to have monitoring after that. There were only rare circumstances where someone might need monitoring, and that's if they had um, compromised kidney function, so maybe that the drug wasn't clearing as quickly as it needed to, or they were having a surgery, or there was some type of adverse event or medication failure. So my job was to develop a LC tandem mass spec assay that could simultaneously quantify the plasma concentrations of the 3 new oral anticoagulant drugs, as well as the one, which is warfarin, that had been on the market for a long, long time. And so this kind of felt right into my wheelhouse. I felt very comfortable with this project, but it was also new and exciting because it was in the lab medicine space. So another project that I worked on fell more under the biomarker discovery bucket. So I was brought in to discussions with a physician scientist. So he had a clinic, he treated patients, but he also had a laboratory, had a lot of grant funding, a whole team performing this research. He specialized in, or his area of interest was renal cancer. And he shared with me that renal cancer is frequently asymptomatic really until the very end stages of the disease. And by the time patients start to have symptoms, typically they have a pretty poor prognosis. So he felt strongly that there were two clinical scenarios that would benefit from having an early test for renal cell carcinoma. One, a screening test for people who may be at high risk, and two, a test that if someone were to find a lesion incidentally when they were getting an imaging procedure for something completely unrelated, to be able to test a sample from that patient to see the likelihood of that lesion being renal cell carcinoma. So in his lab, they had shown that aquaporin-1, which is a water channel protein expressed in the proximal tubules of the kidney, that they had increased expression in renal tumors. And so the Western blot on the right here shows a few patients that had renal cell carcinoma. You see that we're detecting increased expression of aquaporin-1. And then in healthy volunteers, you weren't detecting this protein, this aquaporin-1 protein. And so the method at that time to perform this semi-quantitative analysis was Western blot, which is kind of slow and it's not really amenable to large scale testing like you would need in the clinical setting. So I was brought in to help create an ELISA method for this physician so that he can do more high throughput screening and testing of his patient samples, and it would move it a bit closer to being something that could actually be adopted in a clinical laboratory because it could be scaled up to handle testing for many patients at once. And so we worked to create an ELISA method in a 96 well plate format. We had calibrators, and as you can see here, the darker the yellow in the well, the more aquaporin-1 was in the patient sample. And so I helped to develop this so that he could use it for his research program. All right, so fast forward to, okay, I get out of my fellowship and I took my first job in 2014 at university hospitals. I took a role as an assistant director of clinical chemistry. And at that time, I felt like that was appropriate for me. I wanted to be the assistant to someone who was a full director there so that I could still learn from them. But I want you to know that when you finish your fellowship and your board certification, you can walk in and take a directorship role on your own. I wanted to work at a place where there was another clinical chemist who I could still kind of learn on the job for the first few years till I felt comfortable. And then I also had a dual appointment as an assistant professor of pathology at Case Western Reserve School of Medicine. So in my closing slides, I just want to show you kind of my progression. So in 2014, I took my first position. By 2018, at the same institution, I had advanced into the role of director. The previous director had moved on to bigger and better things. The position was open, and I felt very comfortable stepping into it as the director of clinical chemistry and now toxicology program that had been started. In 2019, I was promoted to section head of clinical chemistry, diagnostic immunology, and biochemical genetics. And so essentially, it's an umbrella of a large section. Each of these sections, chemistry, immunology, and biochemical genetics, they each have a medical director that's over them. I'm the section head that kind of brings them all together. So when we need to streamline communications from leadership into the section or to leadership from the section in terms of capital budget requests, or making schedules for who covers service. Those are the types of things that I handle as section head. I was also named in 2019 as the chair of the UH Chemistry Clinical Practice Committee. And so when I first started in 2014, this hospital system had about 5 hospitals in it. Over time, as healthcare continued to evolve and change, they purchased more and more hospitals and full systems. So now today there are 21 hospitals in our system. And so it's a challenge to keep all of our labs synchronized, right? So part of my job is to help standardize that to ensure that we're on the same instruments, that we have standardized test menus, that our workflows and the way that we address testing is as standardized as it can be, so that no matter where our physicians rotate throughout the system, that they can expect the same level of service and that we can ensure the same level and quality of care for all of our patients. And then in 2023, I was promoted to associate professor of pathology. And so this just goes to show that just because you move into the clinical realm does not mean that you are giving up academic promotion, essentially. And so the majority of what I work on is clinical, but there is a research aspect. And so those are taken into consideration, and you must gain national recognition in order to be promoted to associate professor. And so that's certainly possible while continuing to do my day-to-day job. So why consider a career in lab medicine? Pretty straightforward. Lab medicine is at the interface between basic and clinical science. You guys are uniquely qualified to sit in these roles. There's a continuing need for well-trained professionals in lab medicine. And in the future, the focus will really be on new technologies and biomarkers, test utilization, and effective communication of this ever-growing amount of information to our clinicians. So much new information is coming out, and we help to interpret it and to help them use these tests safely. So please know that there are a myriad of opportunities to impact patient care. And then in closing, not only are there numerous opportunities, I find it to be challenging and relevant. There are competitive salaries. And I think that, I enjoy having a work-home life balance. And so I think I've been able to accomplish those things, and it's a great career. And I cannot wait to kind of take some questions and help you guys answer any questions you might have or curiosity about what a career in lab medicine might look like. So with that, I will turn it back over to Carolyn.
Hi, everyone. That was a fascinating presentation. So thank you so much, Dr. Noguez. And we are fortunate to have all three of Roche's scholars that are working out of the Atlanta area and supported by Roche. And so I am going to recognize our first scholar, Elise Biesel. She is at Emory University. As I said, she is sponsored by Roche Diagnostics. So Elise. Well, we may have lost Elise for some reason, but the question I know that she wanted to ask you was, could you walk us through a typical day for an academic clinical chemist?
Absolutely. This is a good question. So I feel like for academic clinical chemists, there's a tremendous amount of variety in your day. So it's never dull, and that's what I love. And so a lot of my responsibilities, they really require having good communication with the staff that are performing the testing, administrators, and then the physicians who are using the testing. So I start my day by answering a lot of emails and phone calls and requests about bringing new tests in or planning to bring new things in. I have on-call duties, so if there are any troubles in the lab, I'm helping to troubleshoot or handle rare requests. I'm researching literature to help provide better consultations. There's always new information coming out. I spend a lot of time analyzing data. Like, I am a data junkie. I love to help my section and my department enable data-driven decisions. So I'm looking through a lot of data, reviewing quality control information, procedures, processes, just to make sure that everything is running well from a regulatory perspective and that we are putting out the best results. Lots of meetings, but this is for us to discuss things with our colleagues and collaborators. So to continue to move things forward and keep new technologies coming in and addressing problems. Some teaching responsibilities at an academic medical center. So for me, I'm either making a presentation, giving a lecture somewhere, or I have residents that rotate through the section. So I'm sharing with them like what it's like to be a medical director of chemistry. So much going on, lots of projects going on, but it's never a dull moment.
It's great. So Marissa, I'm hoping you are available to ask your question. Marissa Isakowitz is a Roche scholar at Georgia Tech. So Marissa, are you with us?
Whoa, does this look weird on your screen?
A little bit.
I don't know why that's happening. Sorry.
We'll have an alien question now. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure why it looked like that. I tested my camera before this. But anyway, my question is, what types of research opportunities are available for clinical laboratory professionals, and how do these contribute to the advancements of laboratory medicine?
Thank you. Good questions. So there are so many different research opportunities available. So there are basic research opportunities available if you're interested in trying to better understand the pathogenesis of disease. If you're interested in translational research, there's a lot of opportunities there. And so that's taking some of the findings of basic research and applying it to meet an unmet clinical need. So it sounds exactly as it's named, translational research. And then there's clinical research. So if you want to participate in clinical trials or you want to help assess the performance of a new medical test or an instrument or a process. So many different options. And then in addition to those different areas of research, there are some or lab medicine professionals who will have their own research labs. They have like grant funding, NIH R01s, like they have their lab where they spend most of their time, and then only a small portion of their time is doing clinical responsibilities. And then there's individuals like myself where the majority of my time is clinical, and then a lesser amount of my time I spend on research. So not only do you have a variety in the area that you choose to do your research, but the amount of time you choose to spend in it. That's something you negotiate with the chair of your department.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is from Middleton Parker, and Middleton is an ARC scholar at the University of Georgia, and again, sponsored by Roche Diagnostics. And Maddie, are you with us yet?
Yes, hello.
Perfect. Hi,
Thank you so
Maddie.
much for such a great seminar. I have one question. So what would you say is the most rewarding part of your job as a clinical lab medical director?
Oh, okay. So there's a lot of directions I can go there, but I think I really enjoy the most knowing that I'm using my passion for science and medicine to impact the lives of others. And so that was a really big thing for me. So when I was doing my PhD work, my graduate studies, I really enjoyed what I did, but I knew that it was going to be like 20 years before anything that I found might be useful to people, right? As drugs or medications. And so I wanted to feel more directly that I'm impacting the lives of patients, and then even more so impacting individuals in the community that I live in. So I love feeling like I'm using my love of science and medicine to make a difference in the lives of others.
That's terrific. And I'm just now going to start taking questions from other participants. And the first question that I've received is grant writing a part of your role as director of clinical chemistry?
Hmm. So it can be if you want it to, but for me, I knew that I didn't want to spend a lot of time writing grants personally. I wanted to be able to have the option to do it when I wanted to, but I didn't want people's salaries to be based on my success in securing funding for it. So I have dabbled in writing grants because it was something that I, in my later years, and I'm like, yeah, I could do this. Like I would like to get some funding to help fund some of these passion projects that I have that would require larger dollar amounts to do that, but it's not required. In fact, if you didn't want to do any writing for grants, you don't have to at all. You don't have to, but the option is there.
Perfect. All right, we're getting questions quickly here. How did you decide where to do your laboratory medicine fellowship? What was the key decision maker there?
That's a good question because there's not too much that you can, it's hard to know, but every program is a little bit different. So I literally went and I looked at the web pages of all these different programs, and you'll notice that like there are some institutions that are more heavily focused on research. There are some institutions where there are these large cancer centers, and that's a big part of what they focus on. There are some that don't have pediatric hospitals associated with them. And so I I wanted to be trained as a generalist. I wanted to be able to get exposed to as many different patient populations as possible. And then also, I had just gotten married and I was a bit more geographically constrained. It wasn't that I had to stay in the state, but I was like, look, I'm going to stay on the East Coast because all my family's on the East Coast and it would make it harder to travel back and forth. And so those were the things that were going in my mind. One, I was researching the faculty and kind of what the institution offered. And then two, I was looking geographically.
I think everybody appreciates that's a very honest answer, that it's a mixture of both your personal and professional life. And our next question is, you mentioned that your fellowship allowed for 21 different rotations, and do all these fellowships allow for such a diverse program?
No, so I think it has to do also with where the program is located, right? So Atlanta is unique, right? In the sense that you have access to all of those things. Some programs may not have a CDC type lab for you to rotate through, or a reference lab that is close and associated with it. But there are some labs that, or some fellowships that are part of these large reference labs, like Mayo Medical Labs or ARUP. So they do have clinical chemistry fellowships that are associated with the reference lab portion. So that's the other thing, when you're looking at fellowships, kind of looking to see kind of what's in proximity of it and what the rotations look like.
As an Atlanta-based person, we appreciate your shout out to our community.
Yes.
So in your current role, how do you interface with clinicians that are ordering the tests that your department performs?
So a few different ways. So we have a computerized physician order entry, right? So they're going to go through and they're going to order what they want in the lab information system. It goes through the computer system, and that's easy enough, right? So the test gets done. But there are times when the physician's not sure what the right test is to order. And so they're explaining to us the situation and what it is they're trying to accomplish, or maybe they're getting results that are a bit challenging to interpret, and we're helping them with the interpretation. Sometimes they want to order a test that we don't offer in the laboratory, and that we know that there's a boutique reference lab somewhere that does offer this very specific test that would help answer a clinical question for them. Then we coordinate finding those laboratories and getting those samples there. And so we are consultative, helping them know what tests to order and then how to interpret them.
I'm sure that's very challenging some days, but also very rewarding. So our next question is, I guess maybe on a more personal basis, and how do you manage to have a healthy work-life balance?
I think that careers in lab medicine are different than some other careers for PhDs in terms of work-life balance. And so you want to spend your time writing grants, working extra hours to work on passion projects and research, you can, but you're not required to. So I'm a mother of 3 beautiful kids. I'm very busy in work, at work, but I'm also very busy at home. And I feel like you have the ability to have work home life balance in this position. It's also very flexible in terms of, you're not required to work nights and weekends. You don't clock in and clock out. These are salaried positions where you're hired to do a job. And I mean, when I had to work remote during the pandemic, as most people did, I was able to, because I'm not on site performing testing, but I'm doing more brain work, right? And attending meetings and still keeping things moving. So lots of flexibility, which lends itself to work home life balance.
That's terrific, because I think that is a topic that almost everybody is interested in these days. And it's good to know that you get to go to all those soccer games and do the things that you need to do as a mom, as well as a working professional. So if anybody else has any more questions, this is your time to put it in the Q&A. And we will, let me see if we haven't gotten any more questions. And somebody just wanted to know, what was the exact name of the program that you participated in at Emory?
Oh, yes. So it was just their clinical chemistry fellowship program. So if you go to Emory University's pathology website, it shows the different fellowships that they have. They'll have a heme path fellowship, transfusion medicine fellowship, and then clinical chemistry is one of the fellowships. So you'll have to go to their pathology department website.
Perfect. All right, we've got another question. Can you tell us about a few of your current research projects? And are any of these projects in collaboration with industry?
Happy to. So yes, I have a number of different areas of research over the years that I'm interested in many different things. So I definitely do have some industry sponsored projects that I've worked on. So some of them are evaluating new tests before they ever come to market to see how they would perform. Some are helping with vendors or manufacturers with like new tubes or collection devices, trying to see if they perform well, or to gather the data that they need to be able to submit to the FDA for approval. So a lot of vendor sponsored studies that I work on. In terms of basic research, in recent years, I took a role as a section head of CSF testing in prion disease laboratory. And so from a more basic research perspective, I've spent time in trying to understand what the different subtypes are of prion disease, how the tests that we currently have available, how they're able to detect each of these subtypes, to understand like how we could have to modify the assay or the method to be able to detect the more rare subtypes. In terms of translational research, so these are things that are moving things from the bench to the bedside. It's like new applications of a test that's already been out there. So I do a lot of things in that space. So there's a tremendous amount of variety. You don't have to stick to just one area. I've received good amount of funding to help me with some passion projects, right? Things that I want to move forward myself. I have spent a lot of time trying to improve health equity and access to care. So what people don't realize, and I didn't realize this until I became a mother myself, even really, that working in a clinical laboratory, you assume that there are pregnancy specific reference ranges for things, and there aren't. And so I've worked with our clinicians to develop pregnancy specific reference ranges for a number of different tests that they use every day to make sure that our women and children are using the most accurate ranges for their care.
I'm sure that was very satisfying and will be useful to many of our participants today as they start families. We have one final question. Just for clarification, did you need to do a postdoc in addition to the fellowship that you did?
No, you didn't. A lot of people that I know, they went straight from their PhD training, their graduate program, straight into clinical chemistry fellowships. I think one of the things that you'll need to pay attention to is that there's this lead time on it, right? And so I was 1 year into my first fellowship when I put the application in for my clinical chemistry fellowship. So you're applying almost a year in advance before you actually start the fellowship. So for example, then now, if you have 1 year left in your PhD program, you would want to consider applying now for a fellowship. Otherwise, you kind of have a gap in between. Like I said, I didn't find out about clinical chemistry till I was already in essentially my last year of fellowship. And I thought I had to do more. I actually thought I had to learn more about assay development to make me a more competitive candidate. And the reality is that I've met clinical chemists who did their PhDs in areas where they worked with lasers or they worked with something completely removed from lab medicine, but it has to do with the number of credits you have in science and getting into the fellowship. So.
Well, that's very helpful because I think a lot of our scholars are looking at potential careers, and I think you have given us just such a great overview of clinical chemistry. I want to thank all of our participants today, and particularly Dr. Noguez, who's done such a great job. And I just want to let everyone know that there will be a survey and a link to the recording being sent to you very shortly. And if anybody does have additional questions, just go ahead and put them in the Q&A. And as I said, Dr. Noguez has been so generous, and she said she would be willing to answer those questions via email. So if something has come up in the last minute or two, if not, I think we are just on time. And again, I appreciate ASG for leading this webinar and keeping us on track. We really appreciate you joining us today.